hate that loading screen. Welcome back, everyone. Last time we defeated the Crystal Sage and unlocked the way forward, so let's continue. This is kind of a treacherous area, but there are some treasures to be found. Most notably, these small crystal lizards. They are among the first in the game to drop Twinkling Titanite, as opposed to, say, a specialized upgrade material like a fire gem. Doing a bit of quick inventory management here. I want to be able to cast sorceries, but I've noticed that the heretic staff that we found earlier actually has much better spell buff than the normal staff does. So our spells cast from it will be more powerful. At least that's the idea. It might not really come into play until later when we have more intelligence. The damage seems more than sufficient for now, though. 2 grandsons at once on this narrow footing can be difficult. Especially since their giant cages protect them from backstabs. They have no ranged attacks to speak of, and they're not terribly good at closing the gap quickly. So ranged attacks like Great Heavy Soul Arrow actually do work very well. I briefly mistake this corpse for something alive. They're so small it's sort of difficult to tell the difference. This vantage point is useful, but the Evangelist can still counterattack with gnawing. It's best to finish it up quickly with some close-up attacks when she gets low. The Herald set is what the Herald starts out with, surprisingly enough. It's medium armor that looks pretty cool, and it offers good protection against most things. I also want to try out Bursting Fireball this episode. If the spell icon is any indication, we're going to drown them in a veritable mountain of fireballs. What a horribly useless spell that was. This NPC is an even worse target to test this out on than a normal enemy would be, because he is wearing the Fallen Knight armor. The Fallen Knight armor has very high resistance against fire attacks, so even Fire Orb, which is a good spell that you should use, doesn't do all that much damage. Physical attacks will serve you much better. He attacks with a straight sword and throwing daggers. The throwing daggers don't do an awful lot of damage, but they can interrupt you. Actually, I tell a lie, those aren't throwing daggers. They inflict bleed, so those are actually kukris, which are basically throwing daggers, but more so. That fight got off to a rough start, but since he doesn't respawn, I'm going to take this opportunity to take that awful Bursting Fireball spell off my hotbar and put on something good, like Great Combustion, or literally nothing. Our reward for this encounter is the Paladin's Ashes, which, like the Mortician's Ashes, will unlock some new items at the Shrine Maiden when we go turn it into her. Further up here, we've got another unique NPC enemy, who is also fond of throwing daggers. I'm not sure if one hits me here, so I can't tell exactly which ones they are. Either way, this bandit has much lower resistance to fire and magic. He also wields a unique shield. Our reward for beating him is that shield. It's the spider shield, which protects against poison attacks. It doesn't actually increase your poison resistance by that much. It's sort of a weird thing. I honestly don't know if it's useful or not. It might be in poison-heavy areas, but most enemy attacks don't actually inflict the poison status. It mostly comes from environmental things. There are a couple of situations where I could see it being good, but it's sort of a niche item, especially because its physical resistance is at 100%. There's another shield up here in this quasi-hidden area, the Crest Shield. Crest Shields are sort of part of a series. We've already seen one or two. The Grass Crest Shield is probably the first one you'll come across, and while it has no special defensive properties, it does increase stamina regen. The Vanilla Crest Shield is simply a shield that has good resistances against magic. Or is it dark? Annotation time! At any rate, they're specialized shields that excel in reflecting physical attacks and one specific type of elemental damage. There's one for each element. However, they're upgraded with Twinkling Titanite, so there is quite a bit of competition for that upgrade material, so whether or not you actually want to use one extensively, well, that's a decision that takes some deliberation. This area can be quite nasty, but there's actually a trick to it. Simply traverse up through that ravine, and you'll be covered from all of the hollow crossbow shots. You still have to deal with the dogs, but they're much easier to contend with when you don't have to worry about being sniped. You might be tempted to just charge through up to the main causeway, but that makes things a lot more difficult than they should be. The combination of fast dogs and annoyingly accurate sniper fire makes this an extremely difficult gauntlet to run through if you don't do it correctly. Whenever I run into a message that just says liar, I assume that whoever wrote it found a message that said illusory wall here, and there was in fact no illusory wall. Getting rather tired at this point. I think most people know the locations by now. Oh goodness. That type of hollow isn't actually a new enemy per se. It's simply an ordinary sword-wielding hollow with the added ability to light himself on fire and explode. Certainly a noticeable addition to the arsenal, but not really a unique enemy as such. Dealing with them is quite easy. You either run away or kill them before they can explode. Over in that corner is the Notched Whip, a reasonably useful dexterity weapon in certain circumstances, but whips in general are sort of eh. This is the Cleansing Chapel bonfire, and this is the first bonfire in the overarching area Cathedral of the Deep. This is where Henri and Horace were seeking Grim Aldrich. For now, this room only serves as a bonfire. There's no actual way out except the way we came in. We'll find a way in through those doors later, though. These non-hostile hollows are sort of guarding a valuable item in the Estus Shard. However, a completely peaceful way to deal with them is to simply give them a quick shove with a kick. Down here is a genuinely new enemy, and quite a dangerous one at that. These leech or maggot monsters are somewhat reminiscent of the leechmen in Resident Evil 0, and they're quite dangerous. Unless, of course, you decide to use fire, to which they are extremely weak. If you get hit by one of their attacks, some of the writhing things will latch onto you and cause bleeding buildup over a long period of time. You can get rid of them either by eating a red moss, or by simply bringing out your torch. Regrettably, the torch is the only source of heat or light that counts for those, so you can't just use a pyromancy, despite the fact that it's probably hotter. Fighting the leechmen with a normal weapon is quite difficult. They have very high poise and don't stagger easily. They also have long reach, and can cover distance quickly with their long leap attacks. However, if you do have a powerful fire spell or fire weapon, or hell, if you just use the torch and light them on fire with that, they go down very easily. On your first time through, it's helpful to have a healthy supply of blood red moss clumps. You will probably get bled once or twice here. Having a torch out really helps mitigate that, though. It's more valuable twinkling titanite. Oh, I just can't wait to use that on Hazel's pick. Ugh. This area is actually quite rich with crystal lizards, especially if you consider where we came from. There's also the bigger variety hiding behind those crystals. I try to get the drop on them, but the problem is these large crystal lizards, the ravenous ones, are very resistant to fire and magic. Physical attacks are also fairly weak against them too, so they're just overall tough enemies. However, you're best off just hitting them with something. The damage return on magic against these guys is simply not worth it, just from an FP standpoint. If you just hit them enough with anything, they will stagger and you can do a visceral attack, so... Conventional weaponry is definitely the way to go. Through this semi-hidden passage here is a fairly important item guarded by yet another leechman. However, he didn't even get a chance to do anything because we snuck up on him and hit him with a fire orb. The poison bite ring will come in very handy in a couple of areas, so be sure to drop by and get it. It is really, really helpful. As with the blood bite ring, it increases your poison resistance, essentially giving you more tolerance for poison before you actually get the debuff. This lower area in the ravine is sort of optional. There's some valuable upgrade materials here, but there's not actually any compelling reason to visit. You can go through the entire area without ever visiting here if you don't want to. Still, twinkling titanite and titanite scales are reason enough in my book. If you want to use any of the special weapons, you'll need quite a lot of that. There's also a shortcut that loops right back around into the Cleansing Chapel bonfire. One way, though. It's up through a window. Now that we've cleared out that optional area, it's time to progress. To actually enter the Cathedral of the Deep proper, we need to go up. However, the way is not unguarded. It seems that things are bad enough in Lothric that we're in a legitimate zombie apocalypse and the dead are rising from their graves. And not as friendly and sensible undead just as like regular zombies. These incredibly hollowed out fellows are not difficult enemies, but there's a lot of them and they respawn over time. They attack mostly with basic punches and kicks, but they have a couple of unique maneuvers that can make them dangerous if you get caught off guard. That one was guarding the Astora Greatsword. Arguably the best greatsword to use if you are a dex-based character, because it scales more heavily off that and has fairly reasonable requirements in terms of strength and weight. It's an ultra greatsword too, so it definitely packs a punch. This area is a trap. If you go directly for the items back there, then all of the zombies will wake up and attack you. However, by being proactive, you can mitigate this somewhat. Which is good because our prize is only a fading soul. There is also an Executioner's Greatsword, which is a fun little weapon I'll demo later. This zombie is unique in that he has a leech man coming out from inside of him. They're actually quite tough. They don't take much damage from anything, even fire, though they do get set on fire, which neutralizes a lot of their attacks. So, flame, as usual, remains a good answer to leeches. I'm saying leeches because, I don't know, they're honestly maggots, but leeches just sounds less disgusting. But this whole area is kind of gross. I don't like it. Even up in the cemetery area, there's tons of winding paths and alternate routes you can take. If you wanted to avoid most of the trouble, you simply could have dropped down here, but that would forfeit some items. You can't really clear this area out because, as far as I know, the zombies respawn more or less infinitely. You simply have to be quick and take out the ones that come up and directly get in your way. They don't give a particularly large amount of souls either, so it's not as good as a farming area as you might expect. This is actually one of the few places in the game that I ever actually broke a weapon. I just got a little too overzealous with taking out the undead. This is a new enemy, the Grave Warden. These lovely ladies are responsible for keeping all of the zombies in check. To do so, they use their unique Warden Twin Blades, which are among the most effective bleeding weapons in the game. More enemies that cause bleed. Another white birch. And another area where the giant will rain down arrows, but since we befriended him, he is entirely a help in this area rather than a hindrance. As long as we have the special branch he gave us, he will only target the zombies, and he does quite a good job of dealing with them too. Certainly no want for targets here. On the somewhat precarious-looking sarcophagus is another undead bone shard. One of the most valuable items in the game, so it's worth it to come down here, even if you didn't befriend the giant. Though, really, you should do that. He's a nice guy. He likes to help. We're almost in the cathedral proper, but there is a shortcut to unlock first, as well as finding the Curse Ward Great Shield, which is way too heavy for most characters. Kicking down that ladder means that we can immediately ascend up here through way of the ravine. We do have to dodge some leech monsters on the way, but it's a much shorter trek. This area is actually full of interconnecting shortcuts, and I really do like it a lot. At least once we get past the really gross parts. Of course, it's never quite that simple, and the front door is locked. We'll have to find some other way in. This area introduces another variation on familiar enemies. These hollows use weapons that are on fire. They do a little bit of extra damage, and they will pierce through even 100% block physical shields, because they have extra fire damage. Some of them are also fond of the whole light yourself on fire trick, though which ones do it seems sort of random. I briefly remember here that you cannot in fact cast spells with a torch, and switched my catalyst. If you can at all, taking out that archer is extremely useful here. These parapets are quite precarious, and having as little interrupting you navigating them is really key to survival here. Of course, it's not just random hollows we have to worry about. This area is also home to some undead thralls, and they excel in this environment. There are many places for them to hide and hang on to ledges and wait for you to drop down. Slow and steady wins the race. If you have ranged attacks, using them before progressing is probably what you want to do. On such unstable footing, these guys can be a real handful to deal with. I would recommend bringing a shield. My blessed red and white shield is sort of not cutting it. Now, the verticality of this area is a two-way street. Enemies are not immune from falling to their deaths. You can use this to your advantage if you have the presence of mind to do so. Sometimes they'll just drop off on their own. Usually if they get a little too feisty with some of their more wild attacks. The thralls in particular like to cover a lot of distance with their lunges, and sometimes they'll just go sailing off the side. This can be a nasty encounter, but the key here is that only one of these hollows actually has any form of melee attack. So provided you keep some distance from him, and he is the fairly non-aggressive spear type, you can take out the archer hollows first. The path splits a bit here. This is an ambush, but I know it's coming, so I should be fine. Oh. Well, that's part of the price you pay for running such a glass cannon build. Even if you know something's coming, it doesn't mean anything if you fuck it up. Still, this seems like a reasonable time to go back to Firelink Shrine and reconvene a little bit. Don't want to just throw ourselves out there again just to die and lose all our souls. Back at the ranch, the first thing I want to do is burn the undead bone shard so I don't forget. In a similar vein, I also want to go ahead and upgrade our flasks to have more capacity.
Ah, 'tis good to see what needs me.
Fortunately, neither of these things require souls, so in our current dead broke state, we're fine.
Ah, well met, Ashen One. How may I be of service?
There's also the matter of the umbral ash that we found.
Is it gracious? Passing fine ash thou'st given. Let this ash bestow nourishment. I only hope these new wares content thee.
We can't buy anything right at the moment, but it wouldn't hurt to take a look. There's some new stuff on sale. The purple moss clumps in particular are useful to have. Another unique feature about the Shrine Maiden is that, irrespective of Umbral Ash,
Ashen One.
she will also find new items that usually come from dead enemies. For instance, after defeating the Crystal Sage, the big hat becomes unlocked. It's a little expensive, but it's a fairly useful piece of equipment for casters. Same with the Exile Armor, which is super heavy, so not really our area of expertise, but still something to take note of. Brief deliberation on what I want to do here. Stamina is useful for anybody.
Be safe, champion of Ash.
Yoel's been a real helpful guy throughout all this. Most of the NPCs we found have. We'll have to do something to repay him later. For now, though, I think it would be wise to take a small break and reassess our strategy before we tackle the Cathedral once again. It's a treacherous area. Until then, I wish you a safe and pleasant journey.